Part 77. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 794. Although the two exchanged a lot of information, in reality it only took a blink of an eye. The space slingshot under the blasphemer's feet was stretched to the limit, and after a brief stagnation, the blasphemer suddenly the player bounced into the air. Activate the shield. The same thought flashed through the consciousness of Kaylan and Valentina. A glowing spherical energy shield immediately covered the entire machine body. At the same time, they happened to break through the defensive barrier created by Zelo and rushed through, entering a purgatory composed of explosions and flames. The energy shield of the blasphemer completely isolated the flames and high temperatures, and the metal jets and fragments were vaporized the moment they came into contact with the shield. Only the shockwave could not be offset by the energy shield. It was like a diving cabin with good sealing, and a hard enough outer shell will not allow seawater to penetrate in, and the sharks outside will not threaten the people in the diving cabin, but the diving cabin cannot ignore the currents in the ocean, if it loses power in the currents. If so, no matter how sturdy the diving cabin is, it is nothing more than a mobile coffin. Kaylan and Valentina completed the division of labor in a tacit understanding with their consciousnesses synchronized. Kaylan was responsible for using the time-stop ability to observe explosions and shock waves around the body that may affect the movement of the body, and plan the best breakthrough route, and share this information with Valentina, who then controls the posture of the machine based on this information and maximizes her operating capabilities. Although this is just a frigate and a high-mobility support ship, both warships have been specially modified for this special mission. Their firepower is far more intense than ordinary conventional warships. The blasphemer is like traveling in a sea that is constantly stirring up waves. If they make a slight mistake, the terrifying shockwave will push them away from their original route and even hit the ground directly. What a violent bombing! Kaylan couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He has seen many times the images of Ark's fleet intensively bombing the indigenous biological groups on the ground, but seeing it from the perspective of a bystander and seeing it from the first perspective of the bombed are completely different. Bystander only dense shells and missiles could be seen shooting from the warship, roaring to the ground, setting off large expanses of fire and smoke. But only by being in the bombing zone can we truly understand what kind of scene the word earth-falling and earth-shattering expresses. Just as Kaylan finished sighing, he saw another picture in his mind: more than a dozen mass-produced raider mechas holding heavy bolt guns running wildly on a desolate plain, with people approaching from both sides. Thousands of indigenous creatures that resemble a cross between a wild boar and a rhinoceros. The clusters of indigenous creatures on both sides were like a pair of scissors that were closing rapidly. It wouldn't take long before they would cut this poor mecha team into pieces. But at this moment, there was a burst of sound that broke the sound barrier in the sky. With the sound of explosions, a large number of black shadows appeared on the plain. From the perspective of the stage, hundreds of supersonic bombers were seen roaring in, and along with the bombers came large yield ground bombs that dropped like eggs. The sound of explosions is endless. Even though these dozen mass-produced raiders are not the targets of the bombing, they can still feel the sense of fear and oppression that is difficult to describe in words when they are in the middle of the two bombing zones. The ground shook violently along with the pilot's perspective. The majestic shockwave overturned these dozen-ton mechas to the ground, and a wall of fire nearly 100 meters high wrapped in the torn fragments of the land and rose into the sky. Although this was just a memory, for a moment, Kaylan still felt that his breathing was stagnant for a moment. This comes from Valentina's memory. Don't think wildly, Kaylan immediately said to Valentina through synchronized consciousness. It is very dangerous to have distracting thoughts in the neural bypass state, especially recalling the memory fragments deep in the mind, which can easily lead to sharing thoughts with you. The conscious companion falls into chaos and even suffers from symptoms of mental breakdown. In Pacific Rim, the reason why many test pilots cannot become regular is because they are unable to maintain a state of no distractions and complete letdown during consciousness sharing, which leads to connection failure, and even the driver's brain death. Accident. And for someone like Valentina, it is even more taboo to recall this kind of memory fragment that can have a huge impact on the spirit. If K. Ian's mental power hadn't been tempered enough by himself, just that scene just now, it was enough to make him trapped in it and unable to extricate himself. He will subconsciously think that it is a scene that he has actually experienced, and then he will doubt himself, which will eventually lead to brain overload and complete nervous system disorder. At least he will lose his memory or become a fool, at worst he will become a vegetative state, or he will simply hiccup. Fart. I don't know how to control, I have never experienced this kind of thing. I don't know what to do to be like what you described to me. Without any distractions, Valentina told Kay in her consciousness. Lan asked for help. There is a relatively simple way to focus on the current target and the person with whom you are consciously synchronized, just like forcing yourself to count sheep when you can't sleep. I never count sheep when I can't sleep. I always take sleeping pills and painkillers. The information coming from Valentina's consciousness made Lan slightly startled. He suddenly realized that this seemed a bit strange. A paranoid girl whose psychological problems seemed to be really serious. What Valentina needs is a professional psychiatrist, not a dilettante who has only read some introductory psychology books. But if a psychiatrist were to sit in this cockpit and open up to his patients, be honest with each other, and even share memories and thoughts with each other, I'm afraid that psychiatrist would collapse before the patient, right? You seem worried about me. Your mental state makes people have to worry. Lan responded, I am very worried that one day you will suddenly become depressed and want to commit suicide, and your fighting style obviously has a strong self-destructive tendency. That kind of playing style of exchanging injuries for injuries and fighting for lives should be changed in the future. Do you care about me? You care about me, right? I care about everyone around me, including all my friends, Lan answered truthfully. This answer seemed scumbag at this juncture, but it was the truth in Ian's heart. He really just regarded Valentina as a trustworthy friend and never had any thoughts about her in that regard. Lan could clearly feel the loss in Valentina's emotions, but soon, the loss disappeared without a trace. But you didn't say, I can't chase you, right? It seemed that a knot that had been bothering Valentina for a long time was solved, and her mood suddenly became clear. Lan. Why do you like Miss Soma? Is it because she is good looking? No. It's just that Sophia gives me a very special feeling. Lan felt that he was a little short of words. When it came to Sophia, he actually came together with her half-heartedly. If he insisted on saying that he liked her, what about the other person is probably that kind of gentleness and tolerance, right? This feels like. Just like a mother. Valentina helped Lan complete the second half of the sentence, you have never experienced human maternal love, so you long for that kind of emotion, and the appearance of Miss Soma just makes up for it. This kind of vacancy. I understand that feeling because I have never experienced father's love, so sometimes, I look for that feeling in Major Chi. Maternal love? Lan was stunned. He himself had never realized that he actually had such feelings for Sophia deep in his consciousness. But when Valentina pointed this out, he was surprised to find that the other party said that's absolutely right. Is this probably the so-called the authorities are confused, but the bystanders are clear? Xiaya is actually myself? As if the fig leaf was ruthlessly torn away, Ian's consciousness experienced a slight fluctuation, but fortunately, he quickly suppressed the fluctuation. Then why don't you like Major Chi? Although Major Chi is a little older, he is also single. Lan immediately regretted asking this question. I have to say that this question is really, he was so stupid that he could have been selected as the straight male example of the year, but one thing is that in Valentina's consciousness, he did not find the answer to this question at all. I don't know, Valentina said, I just sometimes imagine him as my father. As for you, I don't know why. Let's not talk about this for now. If the people below know that we are talking about this now, they will probably want to strangle us. Kaylan could only choose to change the topic, but for some reason, he felt it in a trance. A touch of weird romance. In a situation where the blasphemer is crossing the sea of fire, surrounded by extremely dangerous explosions and shock waves, and will be swept away by the airwaves if he is not careful, communicating about emotional issues with a girl in a consciously synchronized way, this is what I have to say. It's not romantic, and it's hard for Kaylan to agree with it. The consciousness exchange between the two was extremely fast. Although it seemed like they had been chatting for a long time, in reality, only less than a second had passed. Even the canopy of the misty roost was still intact in the blasphemer mecha. There is no breakthrough. After breaking through the canopy layer and the dense fog layer, you can only stay in the air for a maximum of 2 seconds, Kaylan told Valentina, because the memories and thoughts between each other are transparent, so he does not need to stay in the air for more than 2 seconds. With an explanation, Valentina could understand the reason for his request. Why didn't those indigenous creatures attack those two warships? Because those two warships were resurrected by the Grey Mist Forest. From a certain perspective, these two warships are also part of the Grey Mist Forest. Of course, they will not attack friendly forces. Can leave this forest alive? Don't think about it now. What you have to think about is how to control the body to stabilize itself in the blast wave later. After losing the protection of the tree canopy, the shock wave will become many times stronger. Also yes, can you aim and shoot within 2 seconds? Can. Okay, next, it's real hell. As soon as Kaylan passed this idea to Valentina, the blasphemer mecha broke through the thick fog and rushed into the air without any obstacles. The two warships were bombarding the forest 1 second, and the next second, they had already targeted the blasphemer mecha. Although most of the two warships are equipped with anti-ground weapons, for a single blasphemer, the firepower of the only anti-air weapons can still completely suppress it. Countless missiles at one time. The lasers came overwhelmingly, completely sealing off all the dodge space of the blasphemer mecha. Energy weapons such as lasers are okay, just use energy shields to resist them, but weapons like missiles that explode and generate shock waves are still a headache for the blasphemers who are in the air. Valentina immediately used external armor. The Vulcan cannon mounted on it destroyed the missile flying in one direction in advance, but just when she wanted to take the next step, Kaylan, who had already read her thoughts clearly, stopped her. According to Valentina's original idea, after using long-range weapons to destroy some of the missiles, she quickly raised the height of the aircraft to avoid other attacks. However, in this way, the airborne time would inevitably increase by a few seconds. By then, they would need what we are facing is not the anti-aircraft weapons of the two battleships, but the terrifying biological weapons capable of severely damaging the heavy cruiser. Directly lock on the plasma cannon of the Xiaozhangkai and attack. After completing the attack, it will immediately fall and return to the Grey Mist Forest. The small plasma cannon of the blasphemer mecha has already started to charge during the take-off process. With Kaylan, a human fire control with time-stopping ability, there is almost no possibility of miss. The propeller on the side of the machine body. Several streams of flames were sprayed out, and the blasphemer's airborne posture and facing angle were slightly adjusted, so that the muzzle of the plasma cannon was aimed at the charging cannon of the Xiaozhangkai protruding from the abdomen directly above. Mouth. The faint blue plasma surrounded by white arcs sprayed out from the muzzle. At the same time, the blasphemer mecha turned off all the thrusters on its body and fell into the forest in a free fall. But just when the plasma ball was about to hit the main gun of the Xiaozhangkai, Kaylan saw a scene that made him a little desperate. A brilliant light curtain lit up on the body of Xiaozhangkai. Battleship-level energy shield. The shield-generating devices of these two battleships were not damaged. This means, it is impossible to break through their defenses with just one blasphemer mecha. P.S. Thanks to Gracelia Yan for the 5,000 starting coins, thanks to Nianli for the 1,500 starting coins, thanks to the silence of thorns for the 100 starting coins. PPS Zofia Soma is the woman who could possibly become my mother, Chara Coronaznable. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 795. The blasphemer Mecha fell back to the ground for the second time. At this time, there is only 1 minute left before the Shaojiankai plasma cannon is fully charged. How is the situation? Was it successful? Ivan asked immediately when he saw Valentina and Kaylan coming back. We can't attack the main body of the battleship. Ian's voice came from inside the aircraft. The energy shield generator of the Shaojiankai has not been damaged. The battleship class shield can only rely on blasphemy. The plasma cannon mounted on the mecha cannot penetrate it. Then what should we do? The expressions of everyone on the ground suddenly changed. 33 immediately said to Kaylan, "There is not much time, why don't we just split up and escape now, no matter what else, in short, only one person can survive." Bar. "I want to try again," Kaylan said. "What are you trying to do? Didn't you say that the plasma cannon of the blasphemer mecha couldn't penetrate the energy shield of that frigate?" 33 asked in return. "We don't have much time. If we start moving now, we can ensure that at least half of us can get out of the plasma cannon's range in time," Ivan also said at the side. "You can't escape," Logo said. "As long as you go out from under the dome, you will be directly engulfed by the bombing zone created by conventional artillery shells and missiles. Whether the plasma cannon fires or not, the outcome will be the same." This. Ivan's expression froze. He had to admit that Logo was right. The diameter of the bombing zone created by the two battleships was at least 1 kilometer, and Logo's space barrier extended to its limit. The distance is only a few dozen meters. If we split up and escape from this place now, the first thing those who come out of the barrier will face is the purgatory-like sea of fire outside. "Let's try again." Kaylan took a deep breath. "If it doesn't work, then find a way to stand out." "What are you going to try?" After 33 asked, he turned to look at Logo. "Can you calculate how many shots the blasphemer needs to fire to break the energy shield of the frigate?" The Shaojiankai frigate has 2 battleship-level shield energy generators that can be used interchangeably. There is basically no overload window period. If you want to break its shield, you must use the blasphemer within 2 seconds. The small plasma cannon it carries can attack 12 to 16 times continuously with maximum power. That is to say, it's impossible to do it, right? Ivan showed a bitter smile, looked at each other with 33, and shook his head. "I don't need to break the energy shield of Shaojiankai," Kaylan said suddenly. "Then, what are you going to do?" 33 frowned, looking confused. "We only need to destroy the vines hanging down from the battleship and cut off the connection between the battleship and the grey mist forest. The indigenous creatures living in the forest will naturally help us get rid of these 2 battleships. Since those biological weapons made by Alpha Civilization could shoot down these 2 battleships once, they could naturally shoot them down a second time. All Kaylan needs to do is destroy the friendly force identification modules on these 2 battleships." The blasphemer mecha broke through the canopy and dense fog of the grey mist forest for the 3rd time and jumped into the sky. At this time, there was less than 20 seconds left before the Shaojiankai plasma cannon was fully charged. For Kaylan and Valentina, they had only one last chance to attack. This time the flight time can be slightly longer, probably about 4 to 5 seconds, Kaylan said to Valentina through synchronized consciousness. Although doing so may lead to attacks from those biological weapons, Kaylan feels that in the face of huge targets such as 2 battleships, those biological weapons will most likely not choose the blasphemer mecha as their primary attack target. Of course, the premise is that they have to cut off the connection between the 2 battleships and the grey fog forest. Adjust the posture of the aircraft and prepare to launch all missiles. Target: the vines connecting the Shaojiankai frigate to the ground. Kaylan continued to share the information obtained by relying on time and time to Valentina, and Valentina it controlled the machine body to shuttle back and forth amidst the explosion, quickly approaching the vines hanging down from 1,000 meters in the sky. In addition to its own heavy armor-piercing sword and small plasma cannon, the Blasphemer Mecha is equipped with a large number of weapons mounted on the external armor, enough for each vine to be assigned more than 5 small missiles and giant missiles. A large amount of cannon shells and cluster lasers. Fire. The various weapon bays carried by the Blasphemer's external armor were all opened at the same time. Countless missiles shot out with gray-white trails, and laser beams that looked only as thick as fingers but were extremely dazzling intertwined into one in the air. There was a dense network, the barrel of the machine gun was rotating crazily, the muzzle had turned red, and tons of shell casings were spit out from the ejection window, falling from the air. The Blasphemer Mecha that was stuck in the air was retreating step by step driven by the recoil of the weapon, and the vines hanging down from the Xiaozhangkai were also cut off one by one. With K-Ian's precise guidance, there was no if any round of ammunition missed, it would all hit the most vulnerable parts of the vines. Every time a weapon bay is emptied, the weapon bay will automatically fall off the external armor. In just 3 seconds, the entire Blasphemer Mecha has become slim by a full circle. K-Lan has noticed that with the Blasphemer as the center, the thick fog within a radius of several kilometers below begins to boil like a boil. It won't be long before the biological weapons, including the ghost-faced giant owl, will emerge from the thick fog. Zhong rushed out and pounced on them. When the first ghost-faced giant owl emerged from the thick fog, the Blasphemer Mecha happened to interrupt the last vine connecting Xiaozhangkai to the grey fog forest. The giant ghost-faced owl first quickly approached the Blasphemer Mecha hovering in mid-air, but when it was less than 50 meters away from the Blasphemer, its huge body shook violently. Suddenly, he flapped his wings suddenly, turned around and rushed towards the Xiaozhangkai higher up. This plan works. After seeing the actions of this ghost-faced giant owl, K-Lan finally breathed a sigh of relief. Those vines are the only connection between Xiaozhangkai and the grey mist forest. This is actually just his guess was that if there were other friendly identification modules on the 2 warships, then they might really have no choice but to escape under the indiscriminate bombardment like Ivan said. More monsters rushed out of the thick fog. In addition to the ghost-faced giant owl, there was also a giant bat-like creature and a swarm of scalp-numbing black insects. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 796. The former was named Grey Mist Giant Bat by ARC, which means a giant bat-like creature that only appears in the Grey Fog Forest area. The latter's name is called Iron-Eating Bug. These bugs are very large in size alone. They are small, about the same size as flies on Earth, but they never appear alone. Each black cloud of insects contains hundreds of millions of iron-eating insects. These insects can secrete a highly corrosive wherever acidic substances pass. Even battleship armor that has been specially treated to resist corrosion will become riddled with holes. The big one hasn't come out yet. K-Lan said in his heart, whether it was the ghost-faced giant owl, grey mist giant bat or iron-eating insect, they were the only monsters that originally attacked the Special Operations Fleet. It can be regarded as the level of miscellaneous soldiers, but those elite monsters that can really pose a threat to the fleet are still dormant in the forest and thick fog, and have not appeared in K-Ian's field of vision. Is it because the Xiaozhangkai has just been removed from the friendly list, so the grey mist forest has not yet reacted, or is it that those elite monsters have higher IQs? Most of the biological weapons that broke out of the dense fog pounced on the huge target of Xiaozhangkai. Only a ghost-faced giant owl and a grey fog giant bat locked the Blasphemer Mecha as their target. Don't kill them yet, just deal with them, K-Lan said to Valentina. If these 2 monsters are dealt with too quickly, they will definitely attract more attention and attacks. For this biological weapon, the threat level and priority level of the blasphemer mecha will also increase step by step. Directly above Kaylan and Valentina, the Xiaozhangkai frigate has adjusted the output power of the energy shield to the limit, but it still cannot stop these biological weapons from flying upward like moths rushing to the flame. Although every biological weapon that hits it will be cremated by the energy shield in an instant, only some ash-like broken bones are left that can penetrate this thin layer of light, but in the thousands of under the continuous impact of tens of thousands of biological weapons, the energy shield of Xiaozhangkai is dimming at a speed visible to the naked eye. I think that when the Special Operations Fleet entered the Grey Fog Forest airspace, it must have faced such a battle. No, the situation may have been worse at that time. After all, the elite monsters described in the mission records that are so powerful that it even makes people wonder if the officers and soldiers involved in the mission are hallucinating have not yet appeared. But even if those elite monsters are the hallucinations of the parties concerned, the number of these miscellaneous soldiers alone is enough to kill the Special Operations Fleet. It is hard to imagine that such a large number of biological weapons can be hidden in the canopy of the Grey Fog Forest. These biological weapons kept flying out of the thick fog, which once made Kaylan suspect that they were copied using CTRL-C and CTRL-V. When the blasphemer mecha was passing through the tree canopy, Kaylan saw many things like honeycombs fixed on the branches of the mist perch. Through the holes on the surface of the honeycomb, one could even see inside. Filled with clear, sticky egg-like objects. These egg-shaped objects are all alive, and there are larvae biological weapons of various shapes squirming inside. Kaylan has a feeling that these biological weapons are not actually fertile, they cannot mate with each other, but are guardians without self-awareness bred by this forest. Those hives are not nests, but more like incubators one after another. Just like the barracks that explode in RTS games, as long as you keep sending resources in, the barracks will continue to produce soldiers out of thin air. The energy shield of the Xiaozhangkai will collapse soon, but the charging of the plasma cannon will also be completed soon. Valentina conveyed this information to Kaylan through her consciousness. Xiaozhangkai has 2 energy shield generators, but if the first shield collapses under overload conditions, there will be a short gap when switching between the 2 shields. We can take advantage of this opportunity. Destroy its main gun. Kaylan focused all his attention on the Xiaozhangkai frigate, intercepting the screen and analyzing it frame by frame, and then passed this information to Valentina. There are 3 more ghost-faced owls. No, if 2 of them collide, the energy shield of Xiaozhangkai will reach its limit. The gap between shield switching is only about 0.25 seconds, and the speed of plasma flight it's not as fast as a laser, so we have to get closer. Learn. Valentina controlled the blasphemer mecha and swung a sword to the right, parrying the claws of the oncoming ghost-faced owl. Then, with the help of this reaction force, the thruster nozzle behind her instantly adjusted its position. The height of the entire machine body has once again increased by more than 100 meters. Now, the blasphemer mecha is less than 200 meters away from the charging plasma cannon in the belly of the Xiaozhangkai. Kaylan can already see through the muzzle the plasma ball that is about to form in the barrel. Using extremely high-power lasers to heat heavy hydrogen to a high temperature of millions of degrees, the electrons of hydrogen atoms are separated from the nucleus and become free electrons, and then the electromagnetic field is used to wrap the particles and launch them out. This is the working principle of the plasma cannon. In fact, plasma also exists in life. For example, the most common flame, as long as the temperature reaches a certain level, can be regarded as plasma, but the energy released by the plasma of different atoms is not unlimited. The same, and as the cannonball of the plasma cannon, the energy released by heavy hydrogen atoms in the plasma state is comparable to that of nuclear fusion. It's now. When the last ghost-faced owl hit the energy shield and was wiped out, the energy shield surrounding the entire Xiaozhangkai flickered for a moment and then disappeared completely. At the same time, a fist-sized ball of electricity, the slurry, was fired from the muzzle of the blasphemer mecha and accurately delivered into the muzzle of the Xiaozhangkai main gun. Kaylan did not hear the violent explosion he imagined. The noisy external environment suddenly became extremely silent. All he could observe was the boundless dazzling white light. The strength of the energy shield of the blasphemer mecha was rapidly decreasing, and the sirens were ringing. As for the external armors, they had long ignored their heavy burdens and exploded one after another. The flying parts vaporized in the moment they were engulfed by white light. Not a trace of residue remains. Decrease altitude. Descend altitude, Kaylan shouted in synchronized consciousness, we have retreated into the forest. The canopy of the mist perch can withstand most of the explosion aftermath for us. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi San. Chapter 797. Meanwhile, the forest floor. The bombing seems to have stopped. Moju looked up at the dome and said with some disbelief. Did they succeed? Ivan clenched his fists subconsciously. He felt a lot of pain in the back of his neck from keeping his head raised, but he didn't want to lower his head at all. Calculating time, if Kaylan and the others had not succeeded, the Xiaojiankai plasma cannon should have been fully charged by now. Even if he dies, he must clearly see the scene of his death, instead of burying his head in the sand like the ostriches on Earth do when danger approaches. The next moment, an extremely strong white light penetrated the dense tree canopy and the thick fog that blocked the sky. The originally dark forest glade was reflected as if it were under daylight. The light was so strong that it was difficult to see even with goggles. Perform direct vision. Is it a plasma cannon? Was it fired? Moju's lips trembled slightly. No, if the plasma cannon fires successfully, we will have turned into ashes now. 33 shook his head. I won't have time to express my thoughts for you. You are also from the Hell paratroopers, don't you think so? Don't you even have this bit of common sense? I'm just. Moju choked on 33, and her face turned red and white. I'm just a little nervous. Article 3 of Chapter 1 of the Hell Paratroopers Combat Code, under any circumstances, you must maintain reason and rationality, even if death lies ahead. 33 thought, soldiers who only know how to obey orders can only be regarded as consumables on the battlefield. You have to know how to make your own judgment on the battle situation. Moju flattened his mouth and did not answer. She originally wanted to say that she was no longer a soldier, but she still didn't say this in the end. A humanoid machine body whose shell was burned red crashed down from above. It was the blasphemer mecha that Kaylan and Valentina were riding. Under the action of the cooling device, the outer shell of the aircraft gradually returned to its original color. The cockpit door opened again, and Kaylan, who was naked to the upper body, jumped out of the cockpit and landed on the ground. Did it succeed? Ivan asked. Kaylan nodded, took the spare clothes handed over by Ziluo, and put them on. After cutting off those vines, the indigenous creatures in the grey mist forest regarded the Xiaojiankai as an intruder. Damn it, after those monsters consumed the energy shield, we blasted away the battleship's main cannon with one shot. It shouldn't take long before the entire battleship will fall from the sky. Is it that hot? Did you take off all your clothes? After hearing that the Xiaojiankai was about to crash, Ivan's mood immediately improved a lot, and he also had time to tease Kaylan. The blasphemer mecha can be piloted by 2 people. The clothes I wore before were torn to pieces by the tentacles used for nerve connection, Kaylan said truthfully, but it's hot. For 2 or 3 seconds just now, the cockpit, the temperature inside should be over 60 degrees Celsius, so I don't have any problem. I just don't know if Valentina is affected. You can go check her out. I'm fine. Valentina's voice came from the cockpit. The heat was quickly taken away by the injection fluid in the cockpit, and I was not affected at all. Double piloting. Ivan was obviously more interested in another thing Kaylan mentioned. Isn't this mecha operated by the driver's nervous system? It's like connecting 2 pilots at the same time, wouldn't it? Is there a situation like a conflict of instructions? Or is it that the 2 of you have a high synchronization rate of consciousness sharing? Let's study this after we go back. Kaylan raised his head and looked into the sky. That Xiaojiangkai ship is probably going to be smashed down soon. Everyone, be prepared to resist the impact. Although Kaylan said that everyone should be prepared, in fact, as long as Islogo is alone, it is enough. Several small bubble-like space barriers wrap everyone up and suspend them in mid-air. On the outside of the space bubble, 3 flexible buffer layers are set up to resist the impact caused when the warship lands. Although Zlogo's space barrier cannot withstand the plasma main gun of the Xiaojiangkai, it is more than enough to block the vibration caused when the battleship collides with the ground. A battleship crashing to the ground and self-accelerating collision are 2 completely different concepts. The former is a free-fall motion, with no propeller acceleration and no hull attitude control. When the angle cannot be adjusted, the battleship cannot cut in with the smallest obstructed area. If the angle passes through the canopy of the gray fog forest, then this canopy can serve as an excellent speed bump, absorbing most of the kinetic energy when the battleship falls. I can feel that large objects have entered the canopy, Zlogo said, but that's all. This fog has a strong shielding effect on my perception. Although everyone's sight could not penetrate the thick fog, the flow of the fog kept telling everyone a message. A huge thing was moving from top to bottom, passing through the thick fog. Or, fall. Since the space barrier simultaneously isolates the sound from the outside world, and the gray fog itself has extremely strong sound insulation capabilities, everyone is now in a completely silent world, but in this almost suffocating silence, the ground suddenly began to shake violently. The land was cracked, earth and rocks flew apart, and countless pillar roots and the main trunks of foggy trees were uprooted. A shock wave like a sea wave swept in from the 12 o'clock direction. The ground everywhere it passed was turned up, as if it was swept by an invisible giant plow. Good guy, this is the first time that a battleship has crashed so close to me. 33 looked at the earth and rocks below that were surging like a tide and couldn't help but sigh. What are you going to do next? Yvonne looked at Kaylan. Should you continue heading deeper into the gray mist forest, or... Let's explore the wreckage of the Xiaojiangkai first. I want to figure out some things, Kaylan said. I think so too. Instead of continuing to explore the more dangerous depths of the forest without a navigator, it's better to take advantage of this rare opportunity to collect some clues. Yvonne nodded. Since Moju's father and others can get these clues, so as one of the warships that participated in that mission, there must be more valuable things on board the Xiaojiangkai. Kaylan and others waited until the shaking completely stopped before returning to the ground. At this time, the fog perches in a large area around the area had been uprooted or broken, which suddenly expanded the scope of the forest glade dozens of times. Even the originally dense gray fog became thinner at this moment. Much thinner. The recovery speed of Mist Roost is very fast. It will be back to its original state in less than a week. Just as Moju said, many new saplings have emerged from under the bark of the fallen mist trees. They have grown rapidly like bamboo shoots after a rain. The original trees have been used as nutrients and gradually withered. 1 week is too much for us. Kaylan walked at the front of the team. After being impacted by the crash of the battleship, the gray fog concentration in this area almost dropped to about 1 kilometer behind the red line. The concentration and fluidity have also become much stronger, and the surrounding gray fog seems to be gathering in this direction. Compared to the fog perch that has regrown from saplings, the fog concentration is estimated to return to its original level in less than a few hours. Along the way, Kaylan also saw many incubation nests that were originally hidden in the canopy of the fog perch tree, but after the fog perch tree fell, these incubation nests all stopped the cultivation of biological weapons. Those egg-shaped embryos have also turned into liquid substances and been absorbed by the tree body, and then supplied as nutrients to the vigorously growing seedlings. For the gray mist forest, filling the vacancy in this forest seems to be the highest priority task at the moment. This is good news. At least Kaylan and the others don't have to worry about being attacked by biological weapons on the ground. Although the individual combat capabilities of things like the ghost-faced giant owl are not very strong, their numbers are too terrifying. Even the energy shield of the Xiaojiangkai can be blasted by force. Kailan and the others are a small team might not be able to hold on for even a minute in the face of such a battle. The crash site of the Xiaojiangkai was not far away. Kailan and the others only traveled less than 200 meters, and the remains of the behemoth appeared in their field of vision. Although in the establishment of the Ark fleet, the size of the frigates can only be ranked at the bottom, but this is only a conclusion drawn from comparing with those aircraft carrier battleships that are often several kilometers in length. In fact, this Xiaojiang modified the length of the frigate has also exceeded 500 meters, which is larger than most maritime aircraft carriers in the old era. The hull of the Xiaojiangkai that crashed twice has become dilapidated. Even the thick vines can no longer connect the fragmented hull. The entire battleship was directly broken into 4 parts, with the abdomen. The location of the plasma main gun was evaporated out of thin air, and not even the hardest keel part of the ship was left. That's good. It saves you the trouble of finding the entrance. 33 walked to a crack that was more than 10 meters wide and leaned forward to look inside. There seemed to be a serious fire inside the battleship. The bulkheads were burned completely black, and the space inside the ship was filled with intricate vines. Where should we start searching? Ivan looked at Kailan. My personal suggestion is to search the bridge first, then the CIC and the escape capsules that could not be sent out. These are the places where intelligence is most likely to be stored. Well, in this order, go to the bridge first, Kailan said. The Xiaojiangkai frigate adopts a traditional lift-type central bridge, which can be raised above the deck when not in combat, providing the command team with a good direct view. During combat, it will sink inside the hull and collect information through thousands of monitor cameras installed on the outside of the hull. Of course, there is another use for the lifting bridge, which is to allow the warship to be controlled through visual observation when the external monitors are completely destroyed or interfered with and cannot work properly. This situation rarely occurs. It is also very dangerous to raise the bridge during battle. It can only be said to be an extreme response measure under extreme circumstances. At least the battleship crew will not have the only option of abandoning the ship and escaping when all external vision is lost. When the Xiaojiangkai crashed, the bridge sank into the interior of the hull, and the location to accommodate the bridge was located exactly in the wreckage of the second section. Between the wreckage of the second section and the wreckage of the third section was where the plasma main gun was located. If the bridge had been set a little further back, I'm afraid it would no longer exist now. The fracture of the second section of the wreckage was also tightly blocked by vines and wood fibers. Sanzan-san and Akira Asano moved to the front of the team at this time. One of them waved the sword, and the other controlled the black flying blade. Soon he then dug out a passage wide enough for the blasphemer mecha to pass through. What surprised Kailan was that these vines did not actually completely fill the space inside the battleship. At least the corridor leading to the bridge was clear. There were only some finger-thick vines clinging to the walls, ceiling, and floor. It looks like the messy wiring in those facilities that have been in disrepair. Actually, I'm quite curious, how do these vines control the battleship? 33 lowered his voice and said, is it possible that these pieces of wood can be connected to the circuit board of the battleship's control system? Go in and take a look before talking, Kailan said. The corridor leading to the bridge is only more than 3 meters high and only 4 meters wide. The blasphemer mecha cannot pass through. Kailan had to let Valentina, Emoju, and Ivan stay at the entrance of the passage while he take Asano, Akira, Sanzan and Zilugo and continue moving forward. But as they walked, they discovered another thing. Although the air in the corridor is very turbid, the thick gray fog outside has not invaded the inside of the battleship. It stands to reason that those all-pervasive gray fog can penetrate even if there is only a gap, and the wreckage of this battleship has long been destroyed. It was riddled with holes and had no airtightness at all. Why didn't the gray mist pour into the interior of the battleship? Moreover, the vines that invaded the battleship seemed to have no ability to generate fog. Are these vines and the fog vine two different species? But Kaylan remembered that the vines wrapped around the controlled walker mechas were able to create mist, so that the walker mechas could be covered with a layer of armor composed of mist, but the Shao ship previously when Zhonggai was hanging in the sky, Kaylan didn't see a trace of fog clinging to the battleship except for the vines wrapped around the ship. It's just a little, too clean. This made Kaylan feel alert. There is movement in the bridge, Asano Akira stopped and said when they reached the middle of the corridor. There is no gray fog here, and his hearing will naturally not be affected in any way. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 798. Is there any movement? Could it be that those biological weapons invaded the Shaozhongkai ship? This was K-Ian's first reaction. The biological weapons that can enter the bridge will not be too big, so those terrifying elite-level existences can be eliminated. If it is just monsters like the ghost-faced giant owl or the grey fog giant bat, then with Kaylan and the four of them the combat power is relatively easy to deal with. What kind of movement is it? Can you describe it in detail? 33 couldn't help but lower his voice, but in this silent corridor, no matter how low his voice was, it still sounded extremely clear. I heard a sound like tentacles wriggling, sticky liquid dripping on the metal floor, and the sound of flesh and blood peeling off bones. Akira Asano paused and continued, I can only describe the sound I heard. As for the source of the sound, it seems to be covered by some strange power and cannot be touched by my extended thoughts. Tentacles squirming? Sticky liquid? Kaylan and 33 looked at each other, and both saw undisguised surprise and alertness in each other's eyes. Whether it is a ghost-faced giant owl, a grey fog giant bat or an iron-eating insect, even if all the biological weapons that have not yet appeared but are recorded in the Special Operations Fleet mission records are included, none of them can issue this message. Sound like species. But for Kaylan and the others, this sound is not only not unfamiliar, but also very familiar. In the past 2 years of confrontation with heretical sects, they had heard this voice too many times, so many times that they lost count. Could it be that there are containers of erosion seeds among the crew of the Shaozhongkai? Kaylan murmured. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. 33 immediately vetoed. If you want to join the army, you must not skip the strict physical examination procedures. If there is a container of erosion seeds, it will have been eliminated as early as the physical examination stage. Found it? Especially the Air Force fleet, the screening intensity is greater than that of the Garrison Corps and Field Corps. Every warship crew member needs to undergo a full-body inspection every time he goes on duty. The specific inspection items are more specific than what you relic hunters need to do when they leave and return to the Ark. There are more. I know. Kaylan nodded. Furthermore, at that time, the heretical sect had not yet been born. Although the seeds of erosion had long existed, they had not yet been brought to the Ark by the Prophet and his gang at this point. Kaylan subconsciously thought of the 776 Special Forces team who was buried on that strange unknown island. It cannot be ruled out that the people on the Shaozhong frigate were parasitized by the corrosion seed after leaving the Ark. Judging from the experience of the 776 Special Forces team, it is entirely possible. Tisk, luckily I brought active ammunition. 33 pulled out a pistol from the holster on his waist and inserted a magazine with a yellow and black biohazard symbol printed on it. Because 33's black flying blade is used as a consumable, the precious stalagmite fragments are not melted into it, whether it is for the army on the Ark, the Security Bureau or Kaylan, dealing with the seeds of erosion. The most economical and affordable way is to use active ammunition. After all, this is the only weapon that can be mass-produced at present, and the stalagmite fragments need to be used less. The stalagmite fragments that Kaylan brought out from the nameless island are now less than 1/3. I always feel that things are not that simple. In short, it's better to be careful. Kaylan also took out his weapon. It was the engineer shovel with stalagmite fragments melted into it. As for the other hunting knife, it was because he didn't have it. It had time to recover, but was destroyed by the shot that destroyed the fusion body. The four of them continued walking along the corridor, but no matter how the distance between them and the bridge changed, the only sounds Asano Akira could hear were always those. "My thoughts are blocked," Akira Asano told Kaylan. "It's like hitting an invisible wall." Invisible walls? Kaylan thought for a moment, then looked at Zilugo. Is there anything abnormal in the space on the bridge? But only then did he realize that Zilugo's face looked a little pale at the moment. "I don't know." Sanwoo girl shook her head. "My head hurts a little, and the closer I get to the bridge, the worse the pain becomes." Even Zilugo would have such a reaction. 33 bit his back molar forcefully. "It seems that the things in the bridge are not as simple as the seeds of erosion." At this time, Kaylan already had the intention to quit. For him, Zilugo was his biggest trump card, but now that there was a problem with his trump card, it would be very risky to continue exploring. "Zilugo, how are you doing now?" Kaylan asked. "My abilities are not affected, I just feel a headache," Zilugo replied. In essence, Zilugo does not have a real form. Her body does not even have a head, so it is naturally impossible for her to feel any headache. This symptom should only occur when she transforms into a human form or something else. It only appears when there is a biological form similar to the structure of the brain. But the problem is that there are not 1,000 but 800 causes of headaches in humans. Now that Yvonne is not here, and there are no medical equipment for detailed examination, it is impossible to determine the cause of Zilugo's headache symptoms, and the most important thing is that except for Zilugo, the other three people did not feel any discomfort. The only thing that can prove that Zilugo's headache symptoms are related to the things in the bridge is the closer you get, the more intense the headache will be. "What do you mean? Are we going to withdraw?" 33 looked at Zilugo and then at Kaylan. "Zilugo, try changing into other forms," Kaylan said to Zilugo. Yes, Zilugo nodded. There were no outsiders here. Zilugo immediately transformed into the black asphalt state that Kaylan was in when he first saw her, and then quickly wrapped around Kayan's body, simulating a piece of armor that is somewhat similar to living armor. Even though he already knew that Zilugo was not a human being, when he saw this girl who was so beautiful that could only be described as perfect instantly turn into something inhuman, 33 still showed a wonderful expression on his face. "This is simply unbelievable. How's it going? Do you still feel uncomfortable now?" Kaylan asked. "No," Zilugo's voice sounded in Kayan's mind. "In this state, I don't have those human sensory organs, so naturally I won't have corresponding feelings. P.S. Thanks to book friend 20210625190213650 for the 500 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter, author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 799. However, I can share my senses with you, Zilugo continued, just like you and Valentina did in the Blasphemer Mecha. What? Wait a minute. Before Kaylan could refuse, he felt the armor close to his back change. Countless tiny thorns grew out of the inside of the armor, piercing him. The skin and muscles, as well as the ligaments in the spinal gap, penetrated deep into the spinal cord and were connected to his nerve center. The discomfort only existed for less than a second. After the connection was completed, this living armor felt to Kaylan less like a thing worn on the body and more like a piece of his limbs. But just after the consciousnesses of Zilugo and Kaylan were completely connected, Kaylan suddenly felt the headache that Zilugo had just described. This was not an ordinary headache at all. Kaylan felt as if his brain was about to split. It's as if something is trying to come out of the depths of my brain. Kaylan originally thought that he had a high resistance to headaches. After all, every time he used and stopped his skills, his brain had to endure the kind of colic that ordinary people could not imagine. It felt like someone was there. It was stirring his brain and scratching his spinal cord with a blade, but now, the pain Kaylan felt from Ze-Lugo was countless times more intense than this. Only Ze-Lugo can show no pressure in this level of severe pain. For her face is just a little pale, but for others, I am afraid that the body's self-protection mechanism has been triggered. Passed out. Ian's tolerance was not as strong as Ze-Lugo's. The moment the severe pain struck, he knelt down and the polymer knee pads on his legs hit the metal floor heavily, making a crisp sound. Kaylan. What's wrong with you? 33 were suddenly startled and reached out to support Kaylan. Akira Asano drew out his sword and protected the two of them behind him. I'm fine, I just experienced what Ze-Lugo felt just now. Kaylan shook his head, which was still a little dizzy, and stood up holding his forehead. He couldn't bear the drama deep in his head. The moment Ze-Lugo knelt down in pain, she had already cut off the sharing of senses between them. If her actions had been half a second later, Kaylan would have fallen into a coma by now. Is it that exaggerated? 33 whispered, since I've known you, this is the first time I've seen you look so embarrassed. It's not an exaggeration at all. The pain has gone beyond the limit that human senses can bear. Kaylan took a few long breaths and then recovered. To put it in a more artistic way, it's as if the soul is about to be torn apart like cracked. 33 subconsciously turned his attention to the closed airtight door leading to the bridge near the corridor, and said solemnly, otherwise, we should retreat. I am not afraid of death, I just think that we can still. There are more important things to do. No, I think we should go in. Kaylan stood up straight and looked directly at the door leading to the bridge. Why? If the thing in the bridge can easily kill us, why does it need to use the Xiaozhong modified plasma main gun? Moreover, if its power is really that terrifying, even if we turn around and run away now, you can't escape either. Kaylan said. Hey, after you said that, I seem to think that the things inside are not so scary. 33 suddenly smiled. That's right, this guy still needs the power of the battleship made by Ark, then it means that its body, may be actually very weak. Let's go. Kaylan walked past Asano Akira, who was holding a knife, and walked to the airtight door. He did not use violent means to break open the airtight door, he just put his palm on the door panel. What Ze-Lugo and Kaylan share is not only their senses, but also the ability to control space that is like cheating. An inconspicuous electric spark flashed on the circuit board inside the airtight door, and then the precise mechanical structure began to move. With a click sound of the door latch retracting, the thick airtight door slid in. In the side wall, the bridge of the Xiaozhong Kai frigate was completely displayed in Ian's field of vision. Compared with other parts of the severely damaged battleship, the bridge facilities were surprisingly intact. Most of the semicircular surveillance windows covering the dome were still functioning normally, faithfully presenting the outside scene on the screen. Including the corridor where Kaylan and the others came in, countless vines gathered from all corners of the bridge towards the middle, and finally entangled themselves into a cocoon-like object where the captain's seat was. Through the gaps in the vines, it can be seen that what is imprisoned in the cocoon is a human being, or rather, a thing that was once a human being. Its body is covered with torn wounds, and small transparent tentacles protrude from these wounds, rhythmically moving like water plants at the bottom of the lake. A large amount of viscous liquid flows along the ravines and gaps on the vine cocoon. Finally, it dropped to the ground. The sound Asano Akira heard in the corridor before was obviously made by this thing. There was no clothing on this human body, and the facial features were completely distorted. It was impossible to determine his original identity based on these features alone. With a thought in Ian's mind, a pair of invisible big hands immediately pulled the vine cocoon apart, and the human body wrapped in the vines lost its support and fell out with a snap sound. On the ground, the flesh of it seemed to be very fragile. When it fell to the ground, the flesh and blood on its body burst open. The farthest piece even flew to a place less than 5 meters away from Ian's feet, but almost at the same time, the pieces of flesh that flew out squirmed and crawled back, once again attached to the humanoid skeleton. What monster? 33 narrowed his eyes, raised his gun to aim with one hand, and held dozens of suspended black flying blades in the other hand, ready to go. For some reason, Kaylan suddenly had a very strange feeling in his heart. This person is still alive, and it still retains the consciousness and memory of being a human being. But it is already a completely different thing from human beings. It just knows that it was once a human being. After the physical reorganization was completed, the human body lying on the ground raised its head with some effort, and the pair of cloudy and misplaced eyes immediately met Ian's field of vision. The moment their eyes met, a large number of memory fragments poured into Ian's mind. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 800. All information related to the great gods will bear the imprint of God. This is one of the eternal truths in the universe. The more a biological individual absorbs this kind of information, the more imprints it will accumulate in the body. This is a high-dimensional change, but it will also affect the conventionally observable form of the biological individual. This change is called erosion. It is an irresistible and irreversible process that spreads through the thinking and cognition of individual organisms. When the existence of the great God is realized, the erosion process has already begun. Intelligent creatures are generally curious. Driven by curiosity, they will actively search and absorb relevant information to accelerate the progress of erosion. All information with the imprint of the gods is collectively referred to as forbidden knowledge. To obtain this knowledge, you need to pay an unexpected price. Everything belonging to the great gods cannot be observed and understood by mortals, unless the mortal body is abandoned. When the degree of erosion exceeds the threshold value, the soul of the biological individual will be assimilated by the great God and become a part of him, and the body of the individual left in the mortal world will become corrosion. This phenomenon is called super-erosion. Super eclipse. Kaylan couldn't help but hold his breath and carefully looked at the corroded corpse in front of him. The Undead Crew Association has never revealed to Kaylan what will happen if the degree of erosion exceeds the critical point, but now, a living example is placed in front of Kaylan. This corroded body was undoubtedly one of the crew members of the Shaojiankai during his lifetime. During this operation, he actively or passively accepted forbidden knowledge that was enough to cause the degree of erosion to break through the critical point, so that it became what it is now. This look. From this point of view, the fear of the opposition of the undead crew is not unreasonable. The undead crew undoubtedly possesses a large amount of forbidden knowledge, but these forbidden knowledge can only be divided into several parts. Different members rely on their own memories for preservation. If the crew members share this forbidden knowledge with each other, the risk of super eclipse may increase exponentially. The entire crew members may very well turn into eclipses overnight. Skeleton. Thinking of this, Kaylan couldn't help but break into a cold sweat. Since there is such a risk, why are Demeter and the others still insisting on allowing all crew members to share information? Aren't they worried that their erosion will exceed that critical point? Or, is this their original purpose? Are people like Demeter the real ghosts in the crew? No. No, if this is the case, then their plan is too easy to see through. The members of the Immortal Crew Club are elite selected from a million. They are not fools. They can also think of things they can think of. Even if they want to share information, they should have a way to avoid super eclipse from happening. According to the memories that poured into Ian's brain, after the individual's erosion rate breaks through the critical point, the so-called soul will be assimilated by that great God. To put it in a more understandable way, it is ascension to the divine world, and leaving the physical body underneath will turn into this kind of monster that the Alpha civilization calls corrosion. This statement sounds full of religious flavor, but based on the current level of human cognition, stories about high-dimensional creatures like great gods sound real and religious stories that cannot be explained by science. No difference. In K. Ian's understanding, the so-called soul should be something similar to mental power, but if we want to delve into the origin of this power, it cannot be explained clearly by the current level of technology. In these memory fragments, it is also mentioned that there are two types of hypererosion. One is called chronic hypererosion, the other is called acute hypererosion, like the situation of the previous generation Pope Chiron. It belongs to chronic supererosion. The body gradually mutates into a meat mountain-like monster, but his mental ability is constantly increasing. Now that he thinks about it, he can read other people's thoughts and memories. It is probably in the state of chronic supererosion that the great God part of the power lent to him. The person in front of me is most likely suffering from acute supererosion. What worries Kaylan the most is, what kind of forbidden knowledge did this person come into contact with before, so that he became like this? According to Demeter, there is no quantitative standard for the critical point of erosion. It does not mean that the stronger a person is, the stronger his resistance to erosion. It is very likely that a 9th level enhanced person will only know a very small amount of things related to him and instantly turn into a rotten and oozing monster. However, a weak person who has no power to restrain a chicken or even a terminally ill person may also be able to withstand it. Live a large amount of forbidden knowledge without turning into corrosion. Kaylan obviously belongs to the latter. Of course, this may be inseparable from his identity as a symbiote. Judging from various clues, the anti-corrosion ability of the Alpha people is obviously much stronger than that of the people on Earth. If it were a pure Earthling, the glacier ruins would have been super-eroded when the memory was forcibly instilled by that stone tablet. In the Grey Fog Forest, there is obviously forbidden knowledge that can make people break through the critical point. The man in front of him became a monster because of these forbidden knowledge, and Moju's father also became a monster because of these forbidden knowledge. They will form a team of lumberjacks to explore the Grey Mist Forest again and again. The secrets hidden in this forest may be far more than the ruins of an engine wreckage. K. Ian's brain was still thinking rapidly, but the corpse that fell to the ground had already struggled to stand up. Its turbid eyes were staring straight at Kaylan, and the crack was even worse than a hair lip. The lips kept opening and closing, spitting out indistinct syllables one after another. It speaks the language of Alpha civilization, but they are all meaningless words, just like the babble of human beings in their unconscious state. Can you understand what I said? Kaylan first said it in Chinese, and then repeated it in the language of Alpha civilization. Although erosion is a body that has lost its soul, I decided to try to communicate with this body. After all, in the eyes of humans, there is no such thing as a soul. As long as the brain can work normally, then erosion should have normal thinking and communication abilities. Who are you? The skeleton tilted its head, and an unclear voice came from its throat. Can communicate. The villain in Kaylan excitedly pumped his fist, and the other party's answer was still in Chinese. In other words, this corpse indeed still retains the memory of when it was a human. Kaylan turned back and glanced at Asano Akira and Sanzanzan, and said, "You two go out first and wait for me in the corridor." "This monster, can you handle it?" 33 stared at the corpse with some worry and said in a deep voice. "If I need your help, I will shout. Besides, I am not alone. The strongest combat power in the team is now worn on me. Yes, if there are enemies that even Zelo can't deal with, it will be useless for the two of us to go up there." 33 nodded. "Then be careful, we will wait for you at the door." After saying that, Sanzan-san and Akira Asano quickly exited the bridge. With a thought, Kaylan closed the airtight door again, and surrounded the space where he and the corpse were with a layer of space barrier to prevent Asano Akira from hearing the rest of the exchange. It's not that he doesn't trust Asano Akira, but the taboo knowledge involving the great gods, even if it is just overheard, will corrode the human body and consciousness. Asano Akira is not a symbiote, he is very concerned about erosion. The resistance is far less than that of Kaylan himself. Are you, a human?" the skeleton first asked Kaylan in Chinese. The next second, its throat squirmed a few times, and a strange whisper flowed from its lips. The second sentence is the language of Alpha civilization. Are you an Alpha person? Ian's pupils shrank slightly. Obviously, the other party had most likely seen the body of his symbiont. I am a human being, Kaylan replied in Chinese. I am a search and rescue team sent by ARC. Search and rescue team. The shoulder blades of the corpse twitched, and the whole person fell back to the ground. Looking up at Kaylan not far ahead, a trace of resentment seemed to flash in his eyes. You are lying. It's been decades. There can't be a search and rescue team. ARC has not given up on searching and rescuing you for decades, Kaylan said without changing his face and without a beating heart. In the past few decades, countless people have been buried in this forest. Until today, my team has managed to get here and found you and this battleship. You are looking for me. Who are you? Xiangxi's mind seemed not very clear. After just a few words of conversation, Kaylan always felt as if he was in front of an Alzheimer patient with advanced disease. I am a search and rescue personnel sent by ARC. Please tell me your identity and what happened to the Xiaojiangkai after it crashed. My identity, I am. The skeleton suddenly reached out to cover its head and howled in pain. Then, it began to hit the ground violently with its head, and its forehead suddenly became bloody. It's just that its body also has the same terrifying recovery ability as Kaylan. The wound on its forehead recovered in less than 2 seconds, but the healing was not particularly perfect, leaving strips of bulges like earthworms. Scar. I only remember. The corruption stopped grabbing the ground with its head and murmured, I only remember, someone once called me, Captain. Could this corpse be the captain of the Xiaojiang modified frigate? A series of files related to this person suddenly flashed through Ian's mind. Although the facial features of the corroded skeleton in front of him have been severely distorted and the facial bones have also undergone tremendous changes, its height is consistent with the captain's file. Almost 180 centimeters. Are you Hruni Yang? The captain of the Xiaojiang frigate? Hruni Yang. No, Hruni Yang is dead. I am dead. The skeleton stood up and faced Kaylan. Suddenly, its words became no longer Katon was vague. I accepted the gift from him, and I have become a part of him. Hruni Yang no longer exists in this world, and I will live forever. I am him, and he is me. Calm down. What becomes a part of him is only the soul of Hruni Yang, and you are just a shed body, Kaylan said. But I didn't lie. I am Hruni Yang, but you are lying. You are not human. Jiugu stared at Kaylan. His voice became deeper and deeper. You are one of the betrayers, but even so, he is willing to accept you and give you eternal life and truth. Betrayer, Ian's eyes twitched involuntarily. You mean, the Alpha people? The Alpha people betrayed the great god they believe in. No wonder the mecha created by the Alpha civilization was named Blasphemer. The civilization of emotion is actually a bunch of young men. You have no choice. The corpse walked slowly towards Kaylan. I will send your soul back to him, you will enter his palace, and you will gain eternity. Please allow me to refuse. Kaylan flew up and kicked the corpse away. Life has been rushing towards death from the beginning of its birth. Personally, I don't expect eternal life at all. Not only that, but I feel that eternal life is an extremely terrifying torture for human beings. The IQ of the corpse is obviously not high, and it did not respond to Ian's remarks. Well, since you want me to accept his gift, it means you want me to become what you are now, right? As a necessary condition for super eclipse, shouldn't you remove those taboos? Share your knowledge with me, Kaylan said to the eclipse with a sincere face. Well, in order for me to achieve super eclipse, tell me everything you discovered in this forest. Bar. Forbidden knowledge. Why, do you know those things, the expression on the corpse's face suddenly began to become ferocious. Although the face with dislocated facial features looked terrifying, Kaylan still looked at it. From some clues can be seen in its details, the other party's consciousness seems to be in a state of intense struggle. Quick, run, get out of here. Erosion suddenly changed his tone. Forget everything you saw and heard, never come back. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 801. What? Kaylan was slightly startled. The consciousness that now controls the corpse to say these words should be the original consciousness of the captain of the Shaojiankai frigate Hruni. Get out of here quickly. Don't waste time, otherwise, or it'll be too late. The body of the corpse was twitching violently, as if something was about to come out of its chest. Its hands were tightly covering his heart. He knelt down on the ground with his whole body, pressing his head against the ground, and his back covered with wounds arched into a shrimp shape. What is there in the core of the grey mist forest? Isn't your mission to blow up the engine wreckage? Why are you like this? Taking advantage of the brief moment when Hruni's consciousness was clear, Kaylan asked one after another. No. There are no engine wreckage sites in the forest at all. Wrong. The information is completely wrong. That's... At this point, the corpse, or Hruni, suddenly stopped. It no longer made any sound from its mouth, only black pus and blood with a strong fishy smell continued to overflow from its lips and teeth. Its head was tilted to one side, its cheeks pressed against the ground, and it used its shoulders to support the weight of its upper body. Kaylan could clearly hear the squirming sounds coming from its body, as if there was a leech inside. It seems to be moving through flesh and blood. Hello? Hello? Hruni. Hruni Yang. Captain Yang. No matter how Kaylan calls it, there is no longer any response from the eclipse. This feeling is like watching the author of an online novel suddenly update to the most critical plot, suddenly cut off more chapters and then disappear from the world. It is enough to make a person irritable. Pull directly to full grid. Through Duanzai's communication, Kaylan only obtained two pieces of information from the skeleton Hruni Yang. The first piece of information is that the Alpha civilization has probably betrayed the great god they believe in. Kaylan has already expected this, starting from the glacier ruins. Along the way, there are clues that prove that the Alpha civilization seems to be brewing a huge conspiracy. On the surface, they worship him and regard him as a god, but in fact, there has always been another plan going on secretly. But obviously, this plan should have failed, but Kaylan didn't know whether the failure was because he was discovered by him or for other reasons, but the disappearance of Alpha civilization is definitely inseparable from this plan. The second piece of information is that there is no engine wreckage site in the core area of the Grey Mist Forest. The information is wrong. There is nothing wrong with the first half of the sentence, it is very clear, but the second half of the sentence is a bit elusive. Wrong information. Does it mean that the information obtained by the Special Operations Fleet is wrong, or is it wrong? Even the entire undead crew was kept in the dark. There are many sources of information for the undead crew, but most of them related to the secrets of Alpha civilization are obtained by relying on the symbiote to interpret the Alpha civilization documents unearthed from the ruins. Then, this leads to the two questions: is the initial document obtained by the immortal crew wrong, or is there some deviation in the interpretation process? It would be great if Hruni could finish the second half of the sentence. There are only two pieces of information in total, and the second piece is still incomplete, barely counting as 1.75 pieces. Of course, for Kaylan, the most important thing is this incomplete 0.75 pieces of information. There are no engine wreckage sites at all in the core area of the Grey Mist Forest. The mission record of the Special Operations Fleet was modified, or in other words, the modified version that was originally saved to the hard drive. Although they were severely attacked by biological weapons, maybe they did not retreat halfway. The failure of the mission is probably directly related to the secret hidden in the Grey Fog Forest, and it is this secret that turned the captain of the Shaojiankai frigate Hruni Yang into a corpse, and made Mo Ju's father hate him. I will never forget this man-eating forest. Lan couldn't help but regret. His choice seemed a bit too reckless. Perhaps, if we first look for those fleet veterans who participated in that mission, we will get more valuable information. But soon, Lan erased the thought of regret from his mind. This assumption does not exist, whether it is a special operations team of more than a dozen people like the 776 Special Forces team, or a Class C fleet like the Special Operations Fleet consisting of 5 battleships and thousands of officers and soldiers. Note 1, as long as the undead crew decides to completely block the news, no one will be able to survive until now. Mo Ju's father is just an exception, and this exception cannot be copied. As for the other veterans of the lumberjack team, they may be the surviving members of the Special Operations Fleet, or they may be some special forces that escaped death. Team members, but they all have one characteristic in common: their personal files have more or less bugs, and their existence is difficult to be discovered by ordinary search methods. And if Lan uses the channels of the Undead Crew Club to find these people, it will only alert the enemy. Other members of the crew club will be aware of his intentions first and kill these survivors before he does. The undead crew will never care about individual lives. Even if there are 1,000 or 10,000 people who know about it, they will kill these 1,000 or 10,000 people without hesitation. Although this is cruel, Lan cannot admit that their approach is the safest. If these people who know the secret spread the news, and then communicate with each other, it is very likely that most of the people on the Ark will be transformed into this kind of monster called corrosion. The mimetic crisis in the Institute was only infectious by seeing it, and it had already caused so much damage, so as long as you know his existence, you will be contagious. The cognitive pollution of erosion is absolutely devastating to human civilization. After the undead crew silenced the survivors, it was almost impossible for Lan to run into the grey mist forest to search for clues. Now, another question is placed in front of Lan. Since there are no engine wreckage sites in the grey mist forest, it means that Lan has no chance of finding any living Alpha people, communicating with the survivors of the Alpha civilization, which is the ultimate goal of his trip. If he had known earlier that there were no engine wreckage sites in the grey mist forest, he might not have planned this exploration operation at all. The secret that exists in the grey mist forest is related to forbidden knowledge, but whether this forbidden knowledge is the part of the information that Lan wants to know is unknown. Regarding the degree of erosion and super-erosion, Lan suddenly thought of a very appropriate metaphor in his mind. If the progress bar of the degree of erosion is compared to the remaining capacity of a hard disk, then those forbidden knowledge are files stored in the hard disk that cannot be deleted. When the hard disk is completely filled, the computer will not be able to run. That is, a super eclipse occurs. Although Lan is also very interested in the secrets hidden in the grey fog forest, his hard drive remaining space is only so large. If these files are stored, I am afraid that there would be no chance to explore the things he wanted to know most. You can only choose part of these forbidden knowledge to absorb. If you choose all of them, the result will only be to become this kind of monster called corrosion. For low-level civilizations like humans, thirst for knowledge and curiosity will bring progress, but they can also bring destruction. No matter which angle you look at it, this is an eternal truth. Do you want to retreat? Lan asked himself in his heart. If he goes back this time, the Undead Crew Guild may take some coercive measures to restrict his freedom. Although Lan now has an equal status with other Crew Guild members, if the majority of the Crew Guild members decide to restrict his freedom, then he cannot go against the will of the majority. In this matter, Lan felt that Demeter and others would not stand on his side. This can be seen from Demeter's refusal to inform Lan of those things. He said that sharing information should not be that simple. Lan always felt a little unwilling to go back like this. Not only would he not gain any substantial gains, but he would also completely lose the initiative in action. Even other members of the god hunting group may be implicated. But if they continue to explore deeper, what they will encounter, what will happen, what will be the result, Kaylan has no idea at all. If the core area of the Grey Mist Forest is an engine wreckage site, the only question after arriving there is whether the Alpha civilization survivor who stayed behind the engine wreckage is not hostile to humans and is willing to communicate with number 92. But now, all the previous assumptions have been completely overturned because of Cruni Yang's words. Originally, although the map was covered with fog, at least the endpoint was clearly visible, but now, even the endpoint of the journey was completely hidden in the thick fog. This exploration operation now only leaves unknowns and dangers. When Cruni Yang was conscious, he frantically asked Kaylan to leave here, maybe he should really do what it said. Just when Kaylan began to waver in his heart, Cruni, who had been kneeling on the ground and stopped moving, no, it should be called corrosion at this time, stood up again. The facial features on its face disappeared, as if it had been dissolved by a special solvent. The face became smooth and blank. Through the pale and almost transparent skin, Kaylan could vaguely see the purple blood vessels underneath. This is not like a head, but more like a large ostrich egg covered with skin and flesh. The movement of the corpse was a little stiff, and its limb joints made an uncomfortable clicking sound. The wounds on its body began to rot, and the tiny tentacles melted into pus and flowed along the body surface. An extremely exaggerated bulge appeared on its chest, and the ribs seemed to have been completely deformed. Even the chests of severely deformed patients with chicken breast disease did not bulge so much. Something is growing inside its chest. Seed of erosion? Or a monster like an alien? Kaylan couldn't help but take 2 steps back. The space power from Z-Lugo was ready. As long as there was any abnormal movement in the corrosion, the force of hundreds of thousands of tons would. He immediately slapped it on the ground and pressed it into a piece of flesh film not much thicker than paper. Accompanied by a creepy sound, the chest wall of the skeleton began to crack, and a football-sized vesicle rolled out from it. Then, the corpse fell backwards, completely losing the breath of life. What's this? Ian's eyes were immediately attracted to the things on the ground. This thing looks like a swim bladder in a fish, commonly known as a fish bubble, and inside it, curled up is an embryo that has not yet matured. An embryo with the rudiments of a human fetus. P.S. Thanks to the Hy-Vee account from more than 10 years ago, all the 500 starting coins were lost, thanks to book friend 201901172049381886 for the 159 starting coins. PPS Note 1, regarding the fleet classification standards of ARC: the ARC first cruise fleet that hit Leviathan before, several fleets that participated in the Battle of the Ancient Copper City Ruins, and the Zero fleet that defended Yagunakota all belong to the class of fleet, except for the Zero fleet. In addition to the Yagunaktor as the flagship of the class of fleet is generally an aircraft carrier battleship. It has between 20 and 50 battleships of various levels under its jurisdiction. The number of combat troops starts at 20,000. No upper limit. As for the logistics ships and logistics personnel, there will only be more, not less, than the combat troops. Class B fleet generally refers to the squadron deployed for the convenience of command. Generally, a class of fleet will contain 3 to 4 Class B fleets. The flagship of the Class B fleet is often only small in size. A secondary battleship inferior to the aircraft carrier battleship. As for the C-class fleet, it is an independent establishment. This organization is not fixed, but temporary. For example, in order to perform a certain task, several warships are temporarily organized into a fleet. This fleet belongs to the C-level fleet. However, the size of the C-class fleet will generally not exceed the B-class fleet, but there is no limit on the level of the flagship. The number of ships must be greater than 1, as a more extreme example, suppose a newly launched aircraft carrier battleship is in. If they perform the task of going to the delivery location under the escort of a logistics maintenance ship, then these 2 warships can also be regarded as a C-level fleet. Regarding the fleet level, here are some supplements to the previously vague settings. Some readers may think that the word count is too high, but the ending part contains a lengthy description of the fleet battle. The battlefield will not be limited to the surface of planet Alpha, but will expand to the entire star system where planet Alpha is located, so I think an explanation is still necessary. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 802. Chapter 768. The embryo of. This embryo has completed late differentiation. In terms of time, it takes a normal human embryo 7 to 8 weeks to complete this stage. The embryo has begun to take on the rudimentary shape of a human fetus. Its small body is curled up in the amniotic fluid. The huge head that takes up nearly half of the body has 2 round black spots on it. These are the embryo's immature eyes. In the abdomen of the embryo, there is a small and curved umbilical cord, which is connected to a placenta that is almost the same size as the embryo itself and looks like a kidney. Inside the placenta, dense capillaries can be clearly seen, accompanied by the newly formed heart in the embryonic chest beats rhythmically. But when Kaylan carefully observed the limbs of the embryo, what he saw with his eyes made his heart suddenly tighten. Although the limbs of the embryo were not fully developed and were tightly attached to the torso, they could still be clearly seen. It was immediately apparent that, the fingers and toes of this embryo were completely different from those of humans. Its fingers and toes were actually soft and slender tentacles, with no bones at all visible inside. This is not a normal human embryo. Kaylan imagined what the embryo would look like after it matured and grew into a human, and his scalp suddenly felt numb, because the imaginary picture in his mind overlapped with an image in another memory. This is not a human embryo at all. This is an alpha human embryo. Why do alpha human embryos appear in the chest cavity of erosion? According to the information on the file, Hruni Yang, the captain of the Shaozhongkai frigate, is a 100% pure man. Even if there is no reproductive isolation between alphas and humans, Hruni, as a male creature, it's impossible to get pregnant. Could it be that Hruni Yang's body was transformed after becoming a corrosion? With this thought in mind, Kaylan stepped forward. He first carefully avoided the embryos on the ground, and then inserted the engineering shovel into the chest of the upturned corpse. With a slight pry, he tore the crack that discharged the embryos wider open. Kaylan carefully observed the chest cavity of the corpse. Except for the tiny tentacles growing out of the flesh and organs, the chest of the skeleton was almost the same as that of a normal human being, and there was no extra uterus. Same organs. This vesicle enclosing the alpha human embryo exists independently in the chest cavity of the corpse and has no connection with the body of the corpse. But if this is the case, the embryo cannot grow to such a large size just relying on the nutrients in the placenta. In other words, the embryo will have died before the placenta appears. It cannot be ruled out that body fluid exchange is relied on to provide nutrients for the embryos in the vesicle. Kaylan thought while twirling his jaw with his index finger and thumb. But that's not the point. The point is, why does an eclipse skeleton transformed from a human super eclipse have an alpha human embryo in its body? Judging from the destructive way this embryo was separated from the body, it seems that it was not stuffed into the body of the corpse later. In other words, this thing was probably born from the body of the corpse. Kaylan felt that his brain had fallen into an unprecedented state of chaos. Alpha people, Earth people, Alpha civilization, Earth civilization. Monsters resembling Earthlings appeared in the remains of the engine wreckage, canned food from earthly civilizations, and Chinese character inscriptions on steel structural materials. The more Kaylan thought about it, the more frightened he became. But at this moment, a burst of fierce gunfire and explosions suddenly came from outside the bridge. The space barrier set up by Kaylan is one way. Sounds from inside cannot be transmitted to the outside, but sounds from outside can be transmitted in. Kaylan quickly took out a freezing jar used to preserve living specimens from his backpack, carefully put the vesicle containing the embryo into it, and injected a full jar of LCL liquid into it, and then closed the lid. When he first communicated with the corpse, Kaylan used Ze-Logo's ability to conduct an all-round investigation of the other party. Although due to the existence of that mysterious power, Ze-Logo did not discover the weapon hidden in the corpse. Although the embryo is in the chest cavity, body temperature data can still be obtained. The internal temperature of the corpse is about the same as that of a normal human being, which is also 36.5 degrees Celsius. Kaylan adjusted the freezing tank to a constant temperature storage mode of 36.5 degrees Celsius. Logically speaking, in the face of living samples of such alien creatures, direct ultra-low temperature freezing is the most correct way to deal with them. Under a constant temperature environment, it is likely to cause some uncontrollable changes in the sample. But this embryo is too important to Kaylan. He is very worried that if it is frozen at ultra-low temperature, it may never be able to be revived. A dead embryo and a living embryo have so much research value. It's a world of difference. The safest way is to maintain the environment in which the embryo was originally in the body. As for nutrition, besides LCL liquid, Kaylan couldn't find a better way for a while. Let's just treat the dead horse like a living horse, doctor, he said to himself. The firefight outside became more and more intense, and Kaylan could distinguish the roar of the large-caliber Vulcan cannon used by the blasphemer Mecha, the charging sound of the gauze rifle used by Ivan, and Emoju's TAC-50. When the bolt of the sniper rifle was pulled, the shell casings fell on the metal floor of the battleship with a crisp clanking sound. With Ze-Logo's help, K-Ian's hearing and perception abilities are now as good as Asano Akira's. Asano Showa and Sanzanzan were still guarding the entrance to the bridge at this time. According to the team's operating rules, before Kaylan came out, no matter what happened, neither of them could leave their positions without authorization. 33 could only shout loudly, asking about the situation of the three people outside. However, the situation outside seemed to be far worse than imagined. All radio communications between team members were cut off. Valentina and Emoju had no time to answer 33's calls. Only Ivan's intermittent voice came from outside the corridor. Passed in, indigenous creatures, attack, request, support. Aboriginal creatures. Attack. Kaylan took a sharp breath. Were they attacked by those biological weapons? However, don't those biological weapons only attack intruders whose height exceeds the canopy level? For down-to-earth explorers, they have always been dismissive. Otherwise, Emoju and his team of lumberjacks would have been buried in the grey fog forest long ago. According to time calculation, these biological weapons should have rushed here at the moment when the corpse died and the embryo was separated from the body. Were they afraid of the existence of the corpse before? However, judging from the physical strength, this corpse does not seem to have much fighting ability. Kaylan glanced at the corroded body on the ground. He wanted to put it away, but the increasingly fierce sound of fighting outside no longer allowed him to delay it any longer. Kaylan immediately cancelled the space barrier, put his fingers together like a knife and opened the airtight door nearly half a meter away with 2 clicks, and jumped out. Before Asano Akira and Sanzan-san could speak, he had already said, "Go and support Ivan and the others." Compared with the caution they entered, the three rushed out much faster. In less than 2 seconds, they had passed through the entire corridor and arrived at the battlefield outside. The blasphemer Mecha was seen holding twin large-caliber Vulcan cannons in one hand to shoot at the densely packed monsters, while the other hand kept waving the heavy armor-piercing sword to chop into pieces the fish that escaped the net and rushed forward. Emoju and Ivan found a ruined wall alone as a bunker, and kept shooting at the monsters rushing out of the thick fog. After confirming that none of the 3 people were injured yet, Kaylan turned his attention to the monsters emerging from the fog. These monsters were obviously the ghost-faced giant owl and the grey mist giant bat that had previously attacked the two battleships in the air. But their form has undergone radical changes. The wings originally used for flying have completely degraded and turned into a dispensable layer of fleshy membrane covering the upper limbs. The pair of hind limbs have become extremely developed, giving them due to the extremely strong ground-running ability of these creatures. Although they still maintain their original appearance in general, these flying creatures that could be called the overlords of the air now have frightening ground combat capabilities. Such a strong mutation ability. Is it because we are on the ground now that these monsters have become like this? 33 sighed while driving the black flying blade to harvest the monsters. But the problem is, those who entered before people in the grey mist forest, as long as they don't leave the ground, have basically never been attacked by monsters, right? Who is that, Miss Emoju, don't you think so? The joining of 33 and Akira Asano greatly relieved the pressure on the three people who were originally staying outside. Emoju finally got a short chance to breathe, picked up the empty magazines, and filled them one by one. Bullets are pressed into the ground. I don't know, I know too little about the grey mist forest. What's more, the woodcutter has never gone to such a deep place. Emoju shook her head repeatedly, her expression looked a little ferocious, and her chest was filled with tears. Heaving violently. Her protective clothing and mountaineering jacket were thrown to her feet, and she wore only a tight-fitting tactical vest on her upper body. A lot of sweat flowed down her neck, and the clothes from the collar to the waist were completely wet, outlining her toned muscle lines. The entire right cuff of the hiking jacket she threw on the ground had been torn off. If she hadn't reacted quickly enough just now, not only the sleeve would have been torn off, but also her entire right arm. It would take at least tens of thousands of years of evolution for flying indigenous creatures to mutate into a form suitable for life on the ground in nature, but if it is a biological weapon, the situation is different. Yvonne gasped. The situation is not much better than that of Emoju. The gauze rifle that was scrapped due to overheating of the charging array has been thrown aside by him. At this moment, he is holding a large caliber hunting pistol and shooting at the monsters that are constantly coming. However, due to the rough skin and thick flesh of these biological weapons, it is difficult for Emoju's TAC-50 anti-material sniper rifle to cause any effective damage to them without hitting their vital points. However, large caliber hunting pistols like this type, it's completely just scraping. But I just can't figure out why these monsters suddenly come out to attack us now. There was obviously no movement before. If they were to attack, wouldn't it be better to choose on our way to the crash site of the battleship? At least, wouldn't it be better? At that time, we didn't have any bunkers to rely on, and it was not pleasant at all to be attacked from both sides, 33 said, suddenly turning his head to look at Kaylan. By the way, Kaylan, we were in the bridge just now. How is that monster that can speak human language? Dead. Kaylan replied simply, according to time, it was after the monster died that these biological weapons launched the attack. Is it possible that these biological weapons were inactive before because the monster that can speak human language is still alive? 33 showed a look of disbelief. What is the truth? If these biological weapons, if they were afraid of that monster, why did they dare to attack the battleship suspended in the air before? What monster? Yvonne couldn't help but ask after hearing the conversation between the two. It looks a bit like a container for the seed of corrosion, but it doesn't seem quite like it. By the way, Kaylan, did you kill that monster? I didn't kill it, it died on its own. Kaylan sighed. That's not actually a monster. It was once the captain of the Shaojiangkai frigate, Hruni Yang. It's Hruni Yang? Then how did it become like that? Was it infected by something? This is a long story. I'll talk to you slowly after the crisis is over. Kaylan waved his hand, and an invisible space blade more than 10 meters high passed through the group of monsters. Anyone who came into contact with the body of the monster with the sharp space blade was cut in half silently. Have you noticed something? Emoju suddenly said. The grey mist seems to be getting closer to us. I discovered it. Yvonne frowned. In the past 20 seconds, the gray fog has moved 4 meters closer to us, and now it has invaded the interior of the wreckage of the battleship. When Yvonne mentioned the wreckage of the battleship, Kaylan suddenly had a flash of inspiration and said, I was thinking, these biological weapons will attack us. Could it be because there is no gray fog inside the wreckage of the battleship? We did it before. When we are in the sky, we have to fly out of the thick fog before these biological weapons attack us. P.S. Thanks to the Plague Doctor for the 1,500 starting coins, thanks to Lbobalovia for the 500 starting coins. Alien Relic Hunter author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 803. You mean, because this is in the grey mist forest, but it is not covered by fog, so for these biological weapons, we are equivalent to being at high altitude, and the previous one who could only speak human language, the monster, that is, Hruni, is not dead yet, so the grey mist cannot invade the interior of the battleship, and these biological weapons will not attack us. 33 quickly figured out the connection. Now Hruni is dead, this battleship is no longer fog-proof, and these biological weapons have also lost their fear, but this is not right. I just said that if these biological weapons are afraid of Hruni, then by all means why do they dare to attack the warship when it is in the sky, but when it falls down, they have to wait until Hruni dies to appear. Could it be just a coincidence, Yvonne said, could it be just a coincidence that the time when biological weapons appeared coincides with the time when Hruni died? Flying creatures must mutate into land creatures, even if they can do so at will. Gene-edited biological weapons may also take several hours, maybe just after the death of Hruni. Those hatching nests happen to complete the cultivation of these new forms of biological weapons. Ignoring whether it is a coincidence or not, if these monsters keep coming up like this, we will all be dead. Moju emptied another magazine. She had no spare ammunition, so she simply pointed the empty magazine hard towards the monster in the distance. Smashed over. I only have the last magazine left. I think your ammunition reserve is not unlimited, right? We don't need to fight these biological weapons, Kaylan said, suddenly stopping the attack in his hand. If the general direction of the analysis just now is correct, we only need to retreat into the grey mist, and these biological weapons will no longer be selected as attack targets. After the grey mist completely swallows up the wreckage of the battleship, they will naturally disperse. Really? Moju was a little doubtful. Just give it a try. You don't have to pay a high price anyway. The living armor on Ian's body suddenly changed, turning into a full coverage mask and a body-fitting protective suit. He first rushed forward a dozen steps, and after attracting the attention of the two biological weapons, he turned around and ran into the grey mist not far away. The two biological weapons that were chasing Kaylan gave up the pursuit after Kaylan got into the fog, and turned towards the blasphemer mecha. This method works, Yvonne said excitedly. The next second, Kaylan jumped out of the grey mist again, raised his hand, and the invisible power of space directly crushed the heads of two nearby biological weapons. Everyone, fasten your safety ropes. In addition, take full body protection measures. We estimate that we will have to sneak in the thick fog for a long time, Kaylan shouted loudly. In this situation, it was impossible to use Ze-Loto's power to expel the fog. Everyone had to let the thick fog engulf their bodies in order to avoid the attacks of these biological weapons. The blasphemer mecha and I are covering, you hurry up. 33 took a step forward, and hundreds of black flying blades shot out, forming a blade net in mid-air, heading towards the front. The monster rushing in front jumped down. For a moment, the broken limbs were scattered on the ground, and the smell of blood in the air suddenly became stronger. These biological weapons are the same as the mist perch that is separated from the main trunk. After death, the corpse will quickly degrade and turn into pus rich in nutrients, which will be absorbed by the soil. The mist perch will quickly absorb the pus that seeps into the soil, and transport it to the incubation nest in the canopy and use it to manufacture a new batch of biological weapons. This recycling mechanism can minimize the loss rate of organic matter. there is an almost endless supply of these biological weapons. As many as they kill, the Grey Mist Forest can produce. After the Special Operations Fleet entered the Grey Mist Forest airspace, they were in battle every moment. From the forest the countless biological weapons pouring out of the ship overwhelmed the entire fleet. They didn't even have a second to breathe. Even if Kaylan and the others had the presence of Blasphemer Mecha and Ze-Luo, they could easily crush these biological weapons, but if they continued like this, they would only end up in one outcome, being piled alive to death by an endless sea of monsters. Ivan took out a spare safety rope from his backpack and connected everyone together again. Moju also put on a spare set of protective clothing, put on a gas mask, and connected the oxygen supply bottle. Several people had fixed the secondary safety ropes around their waists. 33 was the last one to return. After he finished all this, he directly controlled the rope head forged with nano alloy and buckled it on the blasphemer machine. On the pull tab on the back of the armor, Valentina and the blasphemer mecha are responsible for breaking up the rear and delaying entering the thick fog for half a second. The others must retreat into the fog at the same time as much as possible, Kaylan said. This is also done for safety reasons. If everyone in the team does not enter the fog at the same time, then the monsters that have lost their target may focus on attacking those who fail to enter the safe zone and clear their hatred in time. In this way, there is a high probability of casualties. 3, 2, 1, retreat. As soon as Kaylan finished counting down, everyone who was close to the edge of the grey fog took a step back in unison and disappeared into the thick fog. In this way, the only blasphemer mechas still staying in the fog-free zone instantly became the target of all biological weapons, but when those biological weapons rushed towards them crazily, what greeted them was a rounded heavy armor-piercing sword. Valentina controlled the blasphemer in a sweep, cutting open the bodies of more than a dozen biological weapons. Then, the reverse thruster located directly in front of the machine was activated, pushing the entire blasphemer mecha to slide into the thick air. In the fog, those biological weapons did not chase into the fog. Valentina had just breathed a sigh of relief, but suddenly she felt the hairs on her back stand up. Even though she was in the constant temperature cockpit filling fluid, she felt a bone-chilling chill climb up from the toes to the neck little by little. According to the original plan, the team would gather in a small area after retreating into the thick fog. They would not leave the battleship wreckage very far, but would wait nearby until the thick fog completely swallowed up the battleship wreckage, and the creatures after the weapons retreated. The search for the battleship continued. Logically speaking, Kaylan and others should be waiting for him behind. But the problem is, through the image captured by the external sensor of the blasphemer mecha, there is nothing around the machine except a thick grey fog that makes it difficult to see. Kaylan? Ze-Luo? Dr. Ivan, Valentina tried to shout, but in the grey fog, the sound could not be transmitted very far. I am afraid she could only shout with her ears. It can only be heard on the shell of the blasphemer mecha. No one responded to her, and there was silence all around, so quiet that one might even wonder if she was deaf. Strong uneasiness seized Valentina's heart. She wanted to take a big breath, but all that poured into her nose and mouth was thick cockpit-filling fluid. She tried to operate the blasphemer mecha and slowly stretched out her arms, using the position where the machine was standing as the center of the circle. If Kaylan and the others had not moved significantly after retreating into the grey mist, the length of the blasphemer's arms would, it should be possible to acquire them all. The arms of the blasphemer mecha moved in the thick fog, as if stirring a bucket of sticky grey asphalt. However, the arms of the blasphemer did not feel like they were touching anything, and the entire machine stretched. His arms spun around in circles, finding nothing. Could it be that they have left this place? Valentina felt her heart beating wildly. She subconsciously wanted to pull the safety rope fixed to the body, but found that only the lock at the end of the safety rope was hanging on the pull ring. As for the safety rope, the main body has disappeared at this time. It can be seen from the break near the end of the rope that the safety rope seemed to have been cut by the sharp claws of those biological weapons. However, throughout the battle, Valentina clearly remembered that no monster had ever crossed it. The side of the blasphemer mecha, even if there is one, is outside the melee attack radius of the blasphemy mecha. If you want to cut off the safety rope, you not only have to go around the back of the blasphemer mecha, but you also have to close the distance to within 5 meters, so that the claws of the biological weapons can touch the safety rope. But the problem is, before that, its head had been chopped off by a heavy armor-piercing sword. Why did the safety rope break? Valentina tried to recall every detail of what happened just now, but the more she recalled, the more confused her memory became. Even the same scene appeared 3 times before her eyes. A completely different image. How so? Valentina swung her fist in annoyance, and after her movements were reflected on the blasphemer mecha, this punch directly made a large pit more than 1 meter deep on the ground. No. Must calm down. Major Chi once taught me, the more dangerous the situation, the more calm we need. Staying calm at all times is the most important quality of an ace pilot. Even if the vehicle he is driving will crash in the next second. Valentina wanted to think about corresponding countermeasures, but the more she thought about it, the more her mind went blank, and even the blasphemer mecha made very humane movements of looking around blankly. Chapter 9, Section 11 of the Operations Manual. When separated from friendly forces, you should first conserve your own strength, and after confirming that there are no direct threats around you, look for the nearest scheduled assembly point or friendly base. No, these things are of no use in this situation. Valentina suddenly missed the feeling when she and Kaylan were conscious at the same time. Kaylan would help her collect all the combat data and formulate all the tactical plans. She didn't need to think about why or what to do. She just needs to follow Ian's orders and complete her tasks. She was supposed to be a knife that could be held in someone's hand without the need for self-awareness. When the hand holding the knife is released, the knife will no longer move, nor should it move. Perhaps, as the destiny of the knife, it should lie quietly on the ground or stay in the sheath at this time, waiting until someone pulls it out again, or it will rust and rot until it turns into ashes. No. I'm not a knife, I'm not a weapon. A scene flashed before Valentina's eyes that she would never forget in her life. She was lying on the cold metal floor of the battleship, with KK looking reproachful. Lan bent down and extended his hand to himself. He said, "I want to live for myself." Valentina seemed to have been injected with a shot of cardiotonic. Her lungs expanded violently, a large amount of filling fluid was sucked into her respiratory tract, and then she was forcefully pumped out. He hasn't given up on me yet, I can't give up on myself. We must find a way to save ourselves. Valentina immediately released the connection mode between herself and the blasphemer, and pulled out the emergency toolbox stuffed on the floor of the fleshy driver's seat. Open the box, put on protective clothing and protective masks, put on various equipment, and load firearms and bullets. But just when she was about to open the cockpit, she hesitated again. No, this is wrong. Her current behavior is in accordance with the requirements in the combat maneuvers. When the pilot is alone, if necessary, he can temporarily abandon the machine whose target is too eye-catching and act alone, but the problem is, the content in the combat maneuvers, in the Grey Fog Forest does not apply. What's more, for Valentina, she can only feel safe when she is sitting in the cockpit, especially when she is alone. The blasphemer mecha was not damaged and had abundant energy reserves. It was a rare combat power. It would be a bit stupid to abandon the mecha and act alone at this time. The only thing Valentina needs to worry about is not to accidentally crush Kaylan and the others while moving. Even the blasphemer mecha made by Alpha Civilization is looking for enemies in this thick fog. The radius has also completely returned to zero, and he is completely blind. Valentina thought for a while and decided to move forward. Although she would be attacked by biological weapons if she left the thick fog, this level of attack did not pose much of a threat to her. She planned to return to a place where she could conduct visual observations and adjust her condition before going. Find Kaylan and the others. The blasphemer took a step forward. The fog has not gone away. Valentina subconsciously thought that the thick fog had spread a little further, so she controlled the machine to take the second and third steps. The blasphemer failed to get out of the thick fog, and where the battlefield should have been, the corpses of those biological weapons were not found at all. Although the corpses of biological weapons will degrade, the degradation rate is not very fast. The biological weapons that were just killed by the sweeping slash after recording should still have most of their corpses. But the ground beneath the blasphemer's feet was only flat soil. Valentina's heart, which had just calmed down, was a little panicked again, and she took a few steps forward. Based on the distance, the blasphemer should have hit the outer wall of the wreckage of the battleship at this time, but there was nothing in front of him. P.S. Thanks to Mu11 for the 100 starting coins. P.P.S. The following plot will have Valentina as the main perspective at the same time. After this section is written, I will write the timeline of the protagonist Kaylan, and the plots on both sides will be interspersed to a certain extent. I just happened to be working on the remake of Legend of the Galactic Heroes recently, and I also plan to try to see what effect it will have to advance the plot simultaneously through two lines.